Hello, hello, hello. Hopefully my mic is working. Welcome, Brutal Planet. Good to see you after a Labor Day weekend. Hope you're all doing well out there. We got Quinn from Icarus Witch coming on today, and that should be interesting. If you haven't heard their stuff, check it out. They got a new single out called "Rise of the Witches." That's pretty badass. I checked out a bunch of their stuff. What was this other song? "They Don't Care About Us." Great song. So we're going to talk to him a little bit. He'll be dropping in around 1. And yeah, before we get to that, we're going to talk about some rock and metal news items. So hopefully you're on board for that. I had kind of a crazy experience this weekend. I went up to Portland to see a friend. And if you haven't been to Portland, if you've ever been to Portland, you know what Portland is all about. It's a weird city. Maybe weirder than Austin. I don't know. But I ended up going to a concert. It was this group called Beats Antique, and not a metal group by any stretch. Definitely more of like a kind of a combination of electronica and live drums, like kind of a hip hop, but not really hip hop though. And then they had these belly dancers, these insane belly dancers. Obviously, a lot of them very attractive belly dancers, and the whole thing felt like kind of like a some kind of ritual in the forest because it was out in the woods in Portland at this venue that was kind of outdoors, and it was amazing. Like the visuals and the sounds, and they had these like kind of drum circles and these breakdowns where they did these synchronized drumming with these dancers and everything, and just like the colors they ran, like the visual show they had with these flags and everything. It was so good. So if you ever get a chance to see Beats Antique, I highly recommend it. But also at the end of the concert, it started raining, and I was like, "Wow, that was crazy!" It was like we called down a storm. It was like I met my friends out in Portland, and we did this like storm dance ritual. It was it was pretty badass. So anyway, if you get a chance, like I said, check out Beats Antique live. Very cool show. So we got some news items today to talk about. Nothing too major, but it's been a few minutes. Also, coming up this week, we got a couple solid live streams. Tomorrow, we have Johnny Kelly from Typo Negative, from I Am, from Silvertone, from Quiet Riot. I only put three of his, from Kill Devil Hill. I only put three of his bands on the banner. But he's just drummer extraordinary. He plays with Danzig too. I don't know if he's playing with Danzig right now, but he has in the past. Anyway, we got Johnny Kelly tomorrow. He missed our kind of Typo Negative anniversary special with Kenny. It was supposed to be him and Kenny, but his dog got sick, and you got to take care of your animals. It was an emergency thing where the dog had a heat stroke. So we're going to have a more in-depth discussion with Johnny tomorrow, and that'll be cool. And then Thursday, we got Maddox Messer from Messer coming in, and that's a reschedule. We had him a couple weeks ago, and he couldn't make it. So hopefully this time we're on deck. And then I'm working on booking some new stuff, but next week we have Scott Mellinger from the band Zao coming in, and Joey has something planned for that should be really cool. I don't want to give it away because I don't fully understand it yet, but I'm sure it will be cool. Zao's a fantastic band, one of Joey's favorites, obviously, and I love their stuff as well. And it'll be cool to. I've never talked to Scott. Joey has interviewed them before. So that'll be cool. And then next week, I'm hoping to have some other bands, but I haven't confirmed them yet, so I don't want to talk about it because one of them is from I shouldn't say a really big band, but a band that I really dig. So we'll see. Anyway, let's get to some news items, right? So, let's see. This first item. Let's do this. Let me just make sure that, yeah, here we go. So this first news item I got here, let me go up here. This is Billy Corgan laments the lack of innovation in rock music. And I thought this was kind of an interesting take because, to some degree, I kind of agree with it. And we had this conversation a little bit about the nature of analog versus digital recording recently. But let's see what Billy has to say here. So, in a recent interview with Soundcheck host Jen Eckert, Smashing Pumpkins frontman Billy Corgan discussed the impact of the internet and social media. The impact the internet and social media have had on the evolution of rock music over the decades. He said, and this is, of course, transcribed by Blabbermouth to give props to them, we've faced a sort of economic, cultural change with what's going on digital, with music going digital, that really changed the unbroken narrative for about 100 years of how people released and consume music. And the fact that catalogs are more present with the click of a button, I think puts bands in a different situation as far as how to reach an audience. So I think there's less emphasis in rock on innovation and more on sort of keeping your spot. My own band aside, where we've kind of pushed to continually innovate, even at the dismay of our fans. So it's hard to say, yeah, it hasn't really evolved the way it would have, but that would have required a different world. And obviously, when the internet became the thing, when digital media became the thing, it changed everything. It changed journalism, it changed politics, so it's to be expected. He continued, when the alternative things started, it was kind of very much from the underground. So the first wave of it was like, who's in, who's out. And then there seemed to come this second wave. And we, as the first wave, kind of looked around and said, who are all these other bands and where are they coming from? Of course, it was a generational moment and it was to be expected. But at the time, it seemed like a bunch of people jumped onto the grunge flannel shirts and suddenly everybody's rocking out and kind of doing what we were doing only a few years before. So we treated, I think, people in that second and third wave as sort of interlopers. And it's kind of the same thing, I think, with metal or any genre, really. Like once it becomes a thing, then you have a bunch of people jumping in and doing it, because it's the popular thing. You see that in rap real heavily because rap is right now very watered down. That's not to say there isn't a lot of good stuff in that genre, but a lot of it, because it's the most popular thing right now, a lot of it's very watered down and kind of like all been done type of stuff. So Smashing Pumpkins North American The World is a Vampire tour kicked off in late June in Las Vegas, produced by Live Nation. The 27-date trek features special guests Interpol, Stone Temple Pilots, and Rival Sons as support on various dates, as well as some of the world's biggest champions from the National Wrestling Alliance who are competing in most cities. I think that's Billy's. I'm sure that's Billy's company. The sequel to 1995's Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness and 2000's Machine of God, Smashing Pumpkins' critically acclaimed trilogy album Atom features 33 tracks in 3 acts and was written and produced by Corgan over the past 4 years. When Smashing Pumpkins emerged out of Chicago in 1988, the world had never heard a band quite like them. They spun together rock, pop, shoegaze, metal, goth, psychedelia, and electronic into a kaleidoscope of saccharine melodies, fuzzy distortion, bombastic orchestration, incendiary fretwork, eloquent songcraft, and unshakable hooks. Upon their formation, their sound was different, iconoclastic, and wholly new, and it is still today. As a result, they sold over 30 million albums worldwide. This last part sounds like a PR person wrote it. Worldwide, and collected 2 Grammy Awards, 2 MTV VMAs, and an American Music Award. Their catalog is highlighted by the Platinum Gish, the Quadruple Platinum Siamese Dream, Diamond Certified Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, Platinum Adore, and Gold Machine. In 2018, they embarked on one of their most successful tours ever, the Shiny and Oh So Bright Tour. Okay, well, what do you think about what Billy's saying there, that there hasn't been much innovation? And I mean, these guys are always stroking their themselves to some degree, and if I was a musician with a laundry list of successful records like that, I probably would be too. But I think there is some validity to what he is saying, in the sense that, there are a lot of rock bands that have come out over the last 10, 20 years that I really dig. But I don't think there's any at the level of like a Zeppelin, right? Like when I was a kid, Tool was a big band, and I would almost say that Tool is like kind of like the Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd of my generation, and they're still out there doing that. But who's the Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd of the 2000s and beyond? Is it? Some people would say maybe Muse. I don't think so. I don't know. Who is it? Yeah, I mean, I don't see it. There's a lot of like I said, there's a lot of bands from the 2000s and beyond that I love. I mean, bands like Norma Jean, Lamb of God, Slipknot started in the 90s, I think, and then kind of took over in the 2000s. Those are metal bands, though. And I'm thinking about like rock bands, like a band like a Nirvana or a Smashing Pumpkins. Like, who are those artists in the 2000s and beyond? I don't know. As far as innovation goes, I do hear some different stuff. Sleep Token might be a good example. Have you ever heard of the band Loathe? Loathe is a band that I've been really digging a lot of their stuff. I'd love to get them on BPM Live at some point. Probably not until they do another album cycle, but those are both British bands too. So yeah, I mean, I would love some feedback on that if people came in and said, "Hey, these are the bands that I think kind of fit this bill." So anyway, we have the guy Quinn from Icarus Witch will be with us in about 40 minutes at around 1:00. And in the meantime, we're going over some heavy metal rock news items. So next on our list, we have a very important story. And I know you're gonna James Hetfield has COVID. Dun dun dun. I need to get sound effects going on this. Eventually that's gonna happen. I'm gonna have like an active soundboard. So because when I do, I'm gonna be able to share stuff like this. Okay? Just for good measure.
I'm ballsy. I don't take no shit from anyone. I smoke my stogie anywhere I want. I don't have to find a hideout place like you.
So there you go. But without the video parts. I want to be able to share that kind of stuff without the video parts. Oh wow, it looks like Quinn might be jumping on a little bit early. Oh, never mind. No, never mind. That's my share stream. All right. So like I said, we got Quinn from Icarus Witch coming up. And in the meantime, I would like to keep going on some of these news items. And we were just starting to talk about James Hetfield from Metallica having COVID. This is obviously a huge deal. I'm being sarcastic, of course. Metallica has been forced to postpone its previously announced September 3rd concert in Glendale, Arizona to September 9th after frontman James Hetfield tested positive for COVID-19. The band was set to perform at State Farm Stadium as part of its 2-night shows for the M72 World Tour. Hetfield and his bandmates had just played for tens of thousands of fans in Glendale on Friday night. Earlier today, Metallica shared a photo of James' positive COVID-19 test and released the following statement. We're very sorry to report that tomorrow's scheduled M72 date at State Farm has been postponed to Saturday, September 9th. As unfortunately, COVID has caught up with James. We're extremely disappointed and regret any inconvenience this has caused for you. We look forward to returning to complete the M72 No Repeat weekend in Glendale next Saturday. All tickets for September 3rd will be honored at the September 9th show. For more information, including refund details, if you cannot join next weekend, please visit SeatGeek. Keep your eyes on Metallica. P.S. All M72 weekend takeover events scheduled for today and tomorrow are still happening. Metallica played an abbreviated set on Friday in Glendale, apparently due to Hetfield's vocal issues. Well, if he had COVID, he had breathing issues. So, according to Ed Maisley of the Arizona Republic, Metallica's 14-song set at the State Farm Stadium was 2 tracks shorter than every other opening night since M72 tour hit the States. Now, that's intrepid journalism. With all the previous shows featuring a set closer, Master Puppets After Seek and Destroy, Metallica also appeared to roll tape on the intro to The Day That Never Comes before switching to Hardwired as the 12th song of the set. Maisley wrote in his review of the concert, Hetfield did appear to relinquish his lead singing duties to the audience more often as the night wore on, but I thought it was just to make the crowd feel more like a part of the performance. According to setlist.fm, Metallica cut out The Day That Never Comes and Master of Puppets from the set due to James' vocal problems. YouTube user Stadia Vlogs shared a video of the Seek and Destroy performance from last night's concert, and he included the following message. Metallica played Seek and Destroy as their last song for their Friday show in Glendale, Arizona at State Farm Stadium. They were supposed to play Master of Puppets last, but James started losing his voice. Hopefully it returns by Sunday. The M72 tour features a bold new in-the-round stage design that relocates the famed Metallica Snake Pit to the center stage. Metallica is visiting a total of 22 different cities around the world and playing 2 nights in each city. That stage setup that Metallica has is absolutely brilliant. And the reason I say that is they just beat Taylor Swift for the record at, I think it was the LA Stadium, the SoFi Stadium. And it's because there is no behind the stage area. Like, they can sell the whole stadium because their stage is round. So, if you go to a stadium show, in most cases, they got the backdrop and then the area behind the stage is blocked out. They're not selling that, right? So Metallica's new stage setup enables them to take full advantage of the entire stage. And that's how they're beating Taylor Swift out for those records, right? Moving on. Got our next story here is Sebastian Bach doesn't have a problem with Paul Stanley using backing tapes during live shows. I gotta say, looking at this picture, I want to give Sebastian Bach credit for not being a Botox disaster. He actually looks like he's aging naturally. And I really appreciate that because it's rare in the rock world. So anyway, former Skid Row singer Sebastian Bach has once again defended Kiss against claims the band is using pre-recorded tracks during its farewell tour. And typically he's the one calling people out for this. So I think this is why this is a story. Ever since Kiss's end of the road trek launched in early 2019, there has been persistent online chatter about frontman Paul Stanley allegedly singing to backing tape. The speculation stemmed from the fact that Stanley had been struggling to hit the high notes in many of the band's classic songs for a number of years. Bach, a self-proclaimed Kiss Uber fan, weighed in on the rumors of playback tapes being used at Kiss concerts while responding to a question from the Sinkin' Stanley YouTube channel at this week's Fanboy Expo in Orlando, Florida. He said, as transcribed by Blabbermouth, we always throw that in because we love Blabbermouth for pulling this news together, and they pick up stuff from us sometimes. He said, my position on that is if you are in your 70s, if you're 72, you got to put on foot-high monster boots and a Godzilla costume and hook yourself up to wires and fly to the top of the roof and sing. A guy in that age, I don't really have a problem with that guy that's in his 70s or 80s might use the technology to give us a show. I can't imagine my mom, who's 81, I can't imagine her breathing fire and spitting blood. Well, I can imagine the spitting blood part, but I don't mind the technology being used for its proper thing, like an old dude giving a show, trying his best. But he's old, right? What do I have a fucking problem with excuse my language here, but you know who you're talking to here. I don't like when I have an opening band who's 23 and they have a whole show on a click track and the background vocals are going. You can tell so easily. It's so easy. So it's almost like Sebastian Bach is kind of using the same excuse that people use for like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, I don't think lip syncs, but because they're doing a dance routine and they're doing all this other stuff. It's kind of okay for them to do that. And I mean, hey, we had Ken Mary from Fifth Angel on, and he said when we talked about the backing track thing, he said this exactly about Kiss. He said, I went to see Kiss. I know they were using backing tracks, and I don't care because I love Kiss, and it was a great show. And the reality is, as a fan, if you're cool with it, that's all that matters. I mean, you're the one buying the ticket. So if you're cool with buying a ticket to a show that's a bunch of backing tracks, that's all you, right? Like, it's really about the audience more than anything and what they're willing to accept. I'm not saying I'm the greatest singer, and you can hear it on my YouTube videos. He continued, I don't always sing great. Nobody does. Newsflash, not everybody sings perfect every single show. That's not what rock and roll is. You have good nights, you have bad nights. You can't tell me about using tapes in a video. I know who's doing it. I know who's not. And if you want to sit down and watch the video with me and tell me that you're not using the tapes, I will tell you that you're full of shit because I don't use the tapes. And if you do, I'm not going to pretend that you're on the same level. Bach added, I have seen Kiss about 4 or 5 times in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's still the greatest rock show in the world because Kiss, there's no show that has the excitement of Kiss. When the lights go down and the bass goes and they fucking hit the stage. If Kiss were in their 20s, I would not like them to use tapes. Or if they were like an athlete one day and said, oh, I think I want to be a rock star, and then they just get up there and do jumping jacks and have a tape going, I've got a problem with that. I don't have a problem with a 75-year-old man giving me a show that he's always given, but also we're not, as fans, dicks. We should pay respect to a guy like Paul Stanley for everything he's done in his whole life, being of that age and still giving us the Kiss show. I feel sorry for people that don't go to a Kiss show. It's your loss. There you go. It's acceptable to him in this context. It's not acceptable to him in the context of Ronnie Radke from Falling in Reverse, which is, I think, who he was arguing with a couple years ago. Back in February 2019, Bach praised Kiss after witnessing the band's concert at the Honda Center in Anaheim, California. At the time, he wrote in a series of tweets, Kiss hit the exact same notes in Anaheim they did in their 30s. I listened to Paul Stanley sing his ass off live. I paid tribute to the band that has given us more than any other band that any of us can name. I have seen way more obvious use of backing tracks than with Kiss. So Blabbermouth is kind of like instigating here. They're stringing together all these different quotes and articles. Most fans assumed that 6 was referring to Kiss. Wait. I must have arranged this wrong. Especially since Kiss bassist vocalist Gene Simmons had previously slammed bands who used backing tapes for not being honest enough to include that fact on their concert tickets. After Kiss played NBC's America's Got Talent in September 2018, Stanley was asked by Rolling Stone if that was actually a live performance or if he and his bandmates had tracked it earlier. What you tend to do is record it live, and that way you know everything is as it should be, he responded. It's not like going into the studio or anything like that. It's with all its imperfections. It's live. In recent years, more and more artists have been given a pass on relying on pre-recorded tracks, drum triggers, and other assorted. Drum triggers are different. I mean, if you're playing death metal in different clubs, it's almost like you need drum triggers because you're playing so fast. A mic'd drum is not going to hit the back wall fast enough before the other beat hits. So I feel like triggers, I don't blame people for using triggers. And there's other types of triggers that trigger samples or whatever. I mean, to me, that's part of a show. Even if you're playing to a click track that has like loaded backing sounds, like string arrangements and that kind of stuff, or even backing vocals to some extent. Now, I would prefer like that the band has someone in the band sing it, like, you know, the guitar player or the drummer or whatever. But if you got to do it, you got to do it. Anyway. For better or for worse, pre-recorded tracks are becoming increasingly common for touring artists of all levels and genres, and they're just not used in pop music. Many rock artists utilize playback tracks to varying degrees. Yeah, everybody does it now. This past March, Kiss's longtime manager Doc McGee defended Stanley's vocal performance on End of the Road, explaining that Starchild fully sings to every song at every concert. He explained, it's enhanced. It's just part of the process to make sure that everybody hears the songs the way they should be sang to begin with. Nobody wants to hear people do stuff that's not real, and that's not what they came to hear. When McGee was asked to clarify if he was actually saying there are backing tracks that Paul is singing to, Doc said, he'll sing to tracks. It's all part of the process because everybody wants to hear everybody sing, but he fully sings to every song. So there you have it. People have varying degrees of opinions on this issue. And like I said, to me, it's a matter of what you as a fan or audience member are willing to accept. For me, it's like, I don't, I want to hear a live band. I go to a live concert to hear the mistakes, that's part of what makes it a live show. And when it's too calculated and too perfect, it just doesn't feel right, But I think what Sebastian Bach is saying here actually makes some sense. It's kind of like Kiss are older guys, and their fans want to see their live show and relive that energy, and Kiss is giving them what they want. So how can you argue with that? So we got one more story before Quinn from Icarus Witch comes on and joins us. And then tomorrow we have Johnny from Typo Negative, Kill Devil Hill, I Am, Silvertone, Quiet Riot. And Thursday we have Maddox Messer from Messer. So next story. This one's a little bit of a hot button one. So don't get mad, but don't get sad. I'm just gonna tell it like it is. And honestly, I think this is a situation where, let me see how does this look? Oh, that's kind of cool. I'm just messing with these different viewpoints here now. Or what's this one look like? Okay. I think I like this one the best. That is really cool. That's like the news thing. So, okay, let me throw this in. Here we go. Yeah, see, I could have been doing this the whole time. I'm going to add one that says... Okay. So, this is an interesting story. I don't know how people are going to feel about it, but let's talk about it. Actually, let me see if I can whatever. Here we go. All right. So, during the latest episode of the Nightly Nuge, that must be Ted's podcast. A news-style clip in which Ted Nugent offers his take on the news of our world every night. The legendary rocker weighed in on the recent comments made by Alice Cooper and Carlos Santana that were perceived by many as being anti-trans. Now, let's stop right there, because that wording is good. Perceived by many, okay? Because what these guys said is not necessarily anti-trans. I don't think it is, personally. It's definitely not the most complimentary thing you could say, but it's also, unless you're wild, sensitive, and kind of like not sensible, it's not that big of a deal. So anyway, Ted said, and again, so this is transcribed by Blabbermouth, so props to them. Well, I, number one, love both the gentlemen manly. I mean, talking about enriching our lives. Alice Cooper, great fans, great musicians, great song, great entertainer. Vaudeville with rock and roll. Who doesn't love vaudeville with rock and roll? Alice Cooper is a dear friend, plus he's becoming more and more, shall I say, Christian over the years, which may have motivated him to stand up against anti-Christian stuff. Now, this is where it gets a little dicey for me, because I'm definitely not a church person, and if you know anything about me, you know that I'm not anti-Christian, but I'm just not religious. And I have my own reasons for that. And they're good reasons, I think. But that doesn't mean I don't respect people who are religious. Like we have Joey on here all the time. He's actually very religious. And Joey and I have a lot in common. So, other than the fact that I don't like religion. So let's keep going. He's becoming more and more Christian, which may have motivated him to say, which is the drag queen scourge. Now, I want to say this to right off the bat because I don't believe that that's the truth, and I don't know anyone who wants to take their kids to drag queen shows, but if they do, that's their decision. And second of all, I will say this: I think kids are safer at a drag queen show than they are at a church, if I'm being honest. So file that wherever you need to, but that's my opinion. They sing to little boys and girls. I just don't think I don't see that. I don't see that. So anyway, that is sinful, that is dangerous, that is criminal, that is horrible. And I think Alice Cooper showed some courage when he stood up and said the self-evident truth, which is an indication of our cultural abandonment in 2023. That we really actually have to mention that men can't get pregnant and that women can't actually have a penis erect in their life unless it's one of ours. The point being that Alice Cooper finally stepped up and admitted the truth that there's only men and women, which I've been saying on stage, which is my audience every night are so special because they're only. That is a beautiful acknowledgement to why my music is so sexy. I strongly disagree with Ted Nugent on that, but I support his freedom to say that stuff. You know, because the reality is in the metal community, there are trans people. Have you ever heard the band Life of Agony? I mean, there's another band called Against Me with the transition singer. There's actually a trans representative in Virginia, Danica Rome, who was in metal bands. And I also don't think that it's only men and women. I think there is definitely a spectrum. This is scientifically proven with gender. Now, that aside, it does get ridiculous at points. Women can't get pregnant. That's just a biological reality. You have to have a womb to get pregnant. But that's not to say that sexuality is not a spectrum, because I grew up next door to a woman who was a lesbian who drove a truck, a very manly woman with a mullet and cut off sleeve shirt, you know, and she was awesome. She was one of the coolest people in my neighborhood, but she was definitely not a feminine woman. She was leaned towards the male side of the gender spectrum. And I think people like Ted Nugent, I mean, it might upset him and he's free. He's free to believe what he wants. And let's face it, he's an older guy. A lot of these older people believe this kind of garbage and they have no open-mindedness or no wiggle room. So that's just how it is, you know? Nugent continued. And Carlos Santana, I love Carlos. He has enriched our lives with his miraculous. By the way, this article does get to what Carlos and Alice said. Right now, they're just quoting Ted Nugent because he inflamed people. I love Carlos. He has enriched our lives with his miraculous music. A dedicated, loving, peaceful man, but he also showed courage recently when he acknowledged that we have to acknowledge there's only men and women is truly embarrassing time for mankind. But Carlos, I love you. Good work. And Alice Cooper, I love you. Good work. Cosmetics company Vampire Cosmetics recently called off its partnership with Alice Cooper after Cooper called gender affirming care a fad and claimed that discourse surrounding the trans community has gone now to the point of absurdity. Now, this is why I wanted to clarify this, because what Ted Nugent just said is not what Alice Cooper said. Alice Cooper did not say there's only men and women, and he didn't say any of that. Listen to what he said. He called gender affirming care a fad and claimed that the discourse surrounding the trans community has gone now to the point of absurdity. Now, this gender affirming care thing is the reason, like, what people don't understand about that is there's money in that, right? Because now pharmaceuticals can sell you, these hormones and all that stuff. So in my mind, that's why this is being pushed so hard, because it's profitable for someone, right? Like gender affirming care. And honestly, for me and any rational person, this is totally fine. And I support it if you're an adult, what they're talking about is little kids being pushed into this. And the only reason that's happening is because of the money that it costs for these hormones and all this stuff. So anyway, that's so let's keep going. Less than 2 weeks after Cooper signed a deal with Vampire Cosmetics, which markets spooky and gothic themed makeup, lipsticks, palettes, and lashes, the 75-year-old singer, again, the guy's 75 years old. So that's part of the reason his views are steeped in a previous generation. The 75-year-old singer was dropped by the company over his comments in an interview with the site Stereo Gum. In light of recent statements by Alice Cooper, we will no longer be doing a makeup collaboration, the company wrote on Instagram, announcing it was cutting ties with Cooper. We stand with all members of the LGBTQIA plus community and believe everyone should have access to healthcare. All pre-order sales will be refunded. So again, at no point did he say that LGBTQ people shouldn't be allowed healthcare. He said gender affirming care for children is ridiculous, and it is. It's like when you're a child, you don't know, you're not a fully developed person yet, and that's fine. Like I know people that are gay, I know people that are trans, but when you're an adult, that's all these people are saying is it shouldn't be pushed on children because you make this decision, and puberty only happens once in your life. So if someone convinces you into this when you're 6 and you go through these operations and hormone changes, you can never go back. There's no detransitioning, right? And that's all these people are saying is let these people become, adults, and then they can do whatever they want. And I don't think that's unreasonable or bigoted or anything. I think that's just sensible. Would you let a child get a tattoo? Like they don't let children get tattoos, but they'll let them chop their dicks off and inject them with hormones before they're 18. Like you can't get a tattoo before you're 18. It's so anyway. In the aforementioned interview, Alice said, "I'm understanding that there are cases of transgender, but I'm afraid it's also a fad. I find it wrong when you've got a 6-year-old kid who has no idea, he just wants to play, and you're confusing him, telling him, yeah, you're a boy, you could be a girl if you want to be. And when you're a kid, if you play with Barbies, if you're a boy, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to transition. I mean, it's not a bad thing either." Cooper also echoed false claims proliferated by anti-trans politicians and activists online that kids these days are identifying as cats and using litter boxes. "I think it's so confusing to a kid, even confusing to a teenager," he said. "You're still trying to find out your identity, and yet here's this thing going on saying, yeah, you can be anything you want. You can be a cat if you want. I mean, if you identify as a tree," and I'm going, come on. What are we in a Kurt Vonnegut novel? It's so absurd, and that's gone now to the point of absurdity. And yes, there are ridiculous people like that, but that's not the general rule, right? The average person is not that way. And I think in these kind of situations too, I almost feel like those types of look, this person dressed up like a cat, and it's almost like a troll move that someone did, and then they try to hold it up as like, see, this is how far it could go. And it's like, no, that's ridiculous. Like times are crazy. Alice went on to repeat the false belief that transgender women pose a threat to cis women and girls in public restrooms. "I can see somebody really taking advantage of this, though," Cooper said. "A guy could walk into a woman's bathroom at any time and just say, I feel like a woman today, and I have the time of his life in there. And he's not in the least bit. He's just taking advantage of the situation. Well, that's going to happen. Somebody's going to get raped, and the guy's going to say, well, I felt like a girl that day, and then I felt like a guy. Where do you draw this line?" And again, these people are trolls. These are not like a guy who does that is not a legitimate transgender person. It's a troll that's making this group look bad. If you're truly a transgender person, it's not going to happen. So Cooper also blasted the whole thing, wondering who's making the rules. Is there a building somewhere in New York where people sit down every day and say, okay, we can't say mother now, we have to say birthing person. Get that out on the wire right now. Who is this person that's making these rules? I don't get it, Alice said, adding, I'm not being old school about it. I'm being logical about it. And yeah, he is. I mean, I will say that some of these views are a little dated, like especially Ted Nugent's. But Alice Cooper isn't saying anything unreasonable. And you got to remember too, this is a guy who's been wearing makeup all his life and kind of toyed with androgyny. His name is Alice Cooper. Okay. So I think for someone like him to be saying these things is probably a good thing. And again, he's not saying anything bigoted. He's not saying anything. Well, okay. I this part about the cats is a little ridiculous. I mean, that is definitely a troll maneuver. But those people are out there, and those people make the trans community look bad. What are you going to do? If the trans community should come out and say, hey, these people don't represent us. That's. But whatever. It's a dicey subject. So Vampire Cosmetics describes itself as a proudly women-owned, disabled-owned, and LGBT plus owned company whose products are vegan, cruelty-free, and talc-free. We are queer, disabled, and proudly neurodiverse women working round the clock to bring you cosmetics so uniquely packaged you exclaim, holy crap, when you see it. Karen Holton, the managing owner of the company, said. Trans businesswoman Wynn Nowland, wrote in Newsweek in June, there is no statistical evidence to support the idea that women or children are unsafe with trans-inclusive bathroom policies, nor is there any evidence to support that there are men dressing as women to gain access to bathrooms for nefarious purposes. I agree. I don't see that. And the people that are just straight trolls trying to make trans people look bad, I would argue. Last week, Carlos Santana apologized for his insensitive comments about the trans community. Look how old these guys are, first of all. Like, you have to expect their views to be a little dated. They're in their 70s. The 76-year-old musician faced criticism when a video of him making an anti-transgender comments during a concert in New Jersey in July resurfaced on social media. When God made you and me, we came out of the womb. You know who you are and what you are, the guitarist is seen saying in a clip. He continued later, when you grow up and you see things and you start believing you could be something that sounds good, but you know it ain't right because a woman is a woman and a man is a man. That's it. And like I said, there are definitely biological realities, but there is also a spectrum. There are definitely, and you've seen it. You've seen people, you've seen very effeminate men, you've seen very manly, masculine women. There is a spectrum of sexuality. It's undeniable. That doesn't mean that men can have a uterus and have babies, though. That just means that there is definitely a lot more of diversity. There's a lot more diversity than just that black and white. There's a lot of gray area, just like with anything. And people can't wrap their heads around that. Some people, especially older people who have never lived in a world where, this is okay and acceptable, and it should be acceptable. Everyone should be accepted as they are. No one should have to feel bad about who they are. So whatever you want to do in the closet, that's your business. I'm okay with that, Santana added, before referencing his friendship with his brother Dave Chappelle, who also faced criticism for anti-LGBTQ comments made in his Netflix comedy special, The Closer. And if you've ever seen that, there is nothing anti-LGBTQ in that special. The whole thing is about a trans comedian who Dave Chappelle knew who could take a joke. And comedy is about taking a joke. So if you can't accept that, I'm sorry. The criticism Santana faced after the video went viral prompted him to release a statement on his Facebook page where he wrote, I am sorry for my insensitive comments. They don't reflect what I want to honor and respect all persons' ideals and beliefs. I realize what I said hurt people, and that was not my intent. I sincerely apologize to the transgender community and everyone I offended. So that's good. So he realizes what he said wasn't, as it should be, and he apologized for it. Kiss frontman Paul Stanley and Dangerous Fad, and Twisted Sisters Dee Snider was consequently dropped off the lineup for San Francisco Pride for seemingly agreeing with Paul. So again, right there, gender affirming care for kids. Okay, that's the key there. And it looks like we got Quinn coming on right now. So let's add him in to the stream here. Quinn.
Hey, what's happening?
Welcome, man.
What's going on, man?
I was just reading an article about Alice Cooper and Carlos Santana being canceled, but we don't have to dive right into that.
Right on.
I'm not going to put that on you. Where you guys are based out of Pittsburgh?
Yeah. Yeah, based out of Pittsburgh. Band formed 2003. Jason Myers, my cohort and co-writer, started the band whenever we moved back from LA. And just kind of been going down the trad metal path ever since, man.
Yeah. Well, I listened to your new track the other night, Rise of the Witch.
Yeah.
And are you guys doing the thing where you're just putting out individual tracks, or is this teasing up to an album, a full LP?
Teasing up to an album.
Okay.
More of the kind of traditional method of releasing a couple singles
During the build up.
you know.
Yeah.
So we'll release the street date for the album is October 27th.
Okay. Awesome. Well, one of the things I like to do with bands is get kind of like an origin story. So, I mean, go back as far as you want to go. I mean, you don't have to go too deep, or you can go as deep as you want, but I definitely want to know, how'd you guys come together, and what is kind of the ethos of the band, and how long have you been doing it?
Right on. Well, let's see. I joined, like I said, Jason started the band in 2003.
Okay.
I joined right around 2005, 2006. At that point, the band was getting ready to release their first full length. We had released an EP before that titled Roses on White Lace. And it kind of got some acclaim, especially overseas. So seemed like something was kind of happening early on. So whenever I joined, we had already had our first European dates solidified. So it was hurry up and go, go, go. As soon as I got in the rehearsal room, it was kind of hit the ground running. And we toured on that first full length for about a year and a half. And then started work on the follow-up. A few lineup changes, of course, as a young growing band. You find out who you can work with and who you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, there were a couple other things in the works with Paul Di'Anno. He was the original singer of Iron Maiden. So we ended up going on a few tours as not only as opening for Paul, but as his backing band as well. So I was able to become Paul Di'Anno's guitar player for like 3 years. Yeah, so it was pretty cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah, definitely a bucket list thing, as a guitar player. And it's just been a crazy wild ride after that. Played shows with Sabbath. You kind of name it. We're hey, we have a gig opportunity, we're going to go for it kind of thing.
Gotta respect that. Do your craft whenever you have the opportunity.
Absolutely.
So what would you say are your personal influences? Like what got you into music? What are some of your favorite bands, some of your favorite guitarists?
Oh man, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. Let's see. Whenever I was growing up, my dad was a guitar player. My older brother was a drummer, so there was music constantly in the house. Whenever I was a little kid, I grew up, I wanted to be my older brother. So I wanted to play drums. And I'm sure I annoyed the living shit out of my parents by doing that. And then quickly, I was like maybe 7 or 8, like I was paying attention to my dad playing guitar one time, and then I heard my brother was jamming Bark the Moon in our bedroom, and I was like, whoa, that's a guitar? Like you can do that on a guitar? Like that's pretty impressive. So early on, like right out of the gate, listening to Jakey Lee was what really turned me on to what an electric guitar could do. So Bark the Moon was a huge influence on me. Along with those lines, like Metallica, of course, Master of Puppets blew my little kid mind. I was like, what? It's so heavy. It's crazy sounding. And Queensryche, Maiden, of course, was a huge influence because my older brother, he was a gigantic metalhead, still is. And without that kind of input, who knows? I mean, maybe I wouldn't even be playing guitar. I definitely probably wouldn't be playing metal.
Yeah.
So I got to thank him for that. But yeah, those are like kind of my tried and true influences, are like Reich, old school Ozzy, Jakey Lee, players like that, Randy Rhoads, of course, Queensryche, Maiden, and then the list kind of expands from there,
Yeah. I love it. Have you ever heard this punk band Strung Out does a cover of Bark at the Moon?
Oh,
And
wow.
it's so good. It's so good. It's like a little bit faster and more aggressive, a little bit.
Okay.
It's pretty good. I don't even love that band that much, but that song is just, yeah.
Yeah. Right on. Right on. I'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. So how did you get into the band? Was it a band that you knew about around town? Like, did you know some of the guys? Did you guys play did you play in other bands that were kind of adjacent to it?
This is a pretty cool story. So I had moved from Pittsburgh to Erie, Pennsylvania, for college, for school, and right as I was basically a couple weeks before I was moving, Jason Myers had hit me up online asking, he was looking for a guitar player. And I basically said, oh man, I just signed the next couple years of my life away. I would, love the opportunity to jam with you. I think we just kind of knew each other from, online. And I said, hey, if you guys are still looking for somebody in a couple years, whenever I'm done with school, maybe just shoot me a message. Definitely keep me up to date with what you guys are have going on, and, kind of best of luck to you. And a couple years later, I was playing in a band while I was still living in Erie, and he had came out to the show and finally like formally introduced himself. And I was like, oh man, that's so cool. By that point, they had already released that first EP. They were getting some really good press internationally, and I was just kind of congratulated him on the whole thing. And a week later or something like that, he called me. He's like, hey dude, we want to add another guitar player, kind of thicken up the sound. What do you think? And it's like, well, the timing's right. I just finished school. And I went down and jammed with him. And honestly, from there, it was just kind of a perfect thing for us. Like what I did as a guitar player fit perfectly what they were doing as a band. And instantly, like just within conversations around the rehearsal room, like, what's your favorite Fates Warning album? And as soon as somebody would say something like, oh, that's mine too, so we all kind of got along musically, and had a pretty good vision, and shared that vision of what we wanted to go for and kind of expand on it. So it was kind of everything came to fruition for both parties. Like, they got to add a guitar player and add to their sound. I got to join a band to express what I wanted to do, on the instrument. So it was really cool. And from that day forward, like, Jason and I have been kind of bosom buddies as far as whenever we get together and we write, share ideas, even, visions of like, okay, what do we want to do for next year's merch run for tour or whatever. We just share a lot of similarities when it comes to that stuff. And it's been an incredible working experience as well too, because I'm sure every musician's been in bands where they're just like, man, it's fun, but I can't work with these guys or whatever. It's never been the case with Jason and I. We've kind of found each other and said, oh wow, we like the same things, we work well together, and just latched on and said, okay, you're mine, not letting go.
Natural.
Yeah.
So naturally come together.
Yeah.
So how do you guys meet Paul Di'Anno? How does that happen? How does he approach you guys to play with him?
So he at the time was on our label, Cleopatra Records.
Okay.
They were releasing some of his solo stuff, and of course, the label's like kind of pursuing touring possibilities for Paul to come back to the States. He hasn't been here in so long. The fans would love to see it. Especially, throwing in those old Maiden classics and tour. And so the ball kind of started rolling. And at that point, I think we had a new album coming out, and, you know, the label was really kind of pushing like, hey, if he needs a backing band, like, this is the perfect band. They're old school metal. You know, chances are they already know all these songs, which we probably did. And it was a couple years in the making, but, you know, we started off talking to his then management company, and said, okay, like, what do we have to do to make this happen? And at that point, it was like, okay, we got to make sure we secure, you know, Paul's working visa, all that stuff on the whole logistical side of things. Meanwhile, we were just kind of, you know, waiting in the curtain, so to speak, rehearsing, learning material, while we were still writing and rehearsing our own material. And there was, you know, kind of this period of hurry up and wait, you know. So where you're like, man, I'm not sure if this is ever going to happen. Then before we knew it, like, whenever we least expected it, got hit with like 36 dates. And it's like, oh shit, that's happening. Like, right on, cool. We got to start really rehearsing for this. And we picked Paul up at the airport for rehearsals. We had one rehearsal with him, which was more of a hang session, because he's just, you know, one of the guys, you know, he just likes to hang out and talk and you know, kind of see where everyone's head's at. And we jammed, you know, whenever we first got to the rehearsal room, he's like, oh, I don't know how much, you know, I'm going to sing or whatever. Just want to hear you guys play a couple songs. I might chime in. He ended up singing like 10 songs in a row.
Awesome.
And yeah, it was cool. Like, you know, we ripped into Running Free, and like the hair on my arms are standing
That's
up.
so
It's like,
cool.
that's the guy that sang it,
Yeah.
you know, man, you know, so it was a surreal moment. And we got to become, you know, pretty close compadres, like on the road, like hanging out, you know, meeting for breakfast every day, knocking on a door, like, hey, you know, you want to hang out? Sure, cool, let's hang out, you know, whatever. And he's just he's a really, really good dude, from our experience, you know. He's gives 100%. He really does, man. Like, whether he's filling up to it or whether he's feels like he's tip top, like, he never gives less than that. And that's something that I completely respect, especially in this day and age, man, because, you know, you can't, especially if you're working off back catalog stuff, you can't go out and kind of just expect it to happen. You know, my dad used to tell me, it's like, you know, if you didn't bring it with you, you're not going to find it there. You know,
You guys didn't use any backing tracks on that tour?
nope, none whatsoever. None whatsoever.
I didn't think so.
No.
That's amazing. That's a heavy metal legend. You know, that's like heavy metal royalty.
Yeah, man. And like I said, it was a bucket list for us. You know, we were in awe the whole time. Like, oh my God, like, he would sing something, you know, at sound check or whatever, and be like, oh God, I hope we do that one tonight. Like, you know, I hope we play that song tonight.
That's
so
cool.
It was cool.
So you guys are recording right now. Are you guys self-producing and recording yourselves, or are you like working with a producer in a studio, or how's that happening?
So we actually, the album is finished. The release date, like I said, is October 27th. And we did a lot of self-production on this one, where at my studio, we did all of the guitar tracks, all of the bass tracks, a lot of the keys and synth stuff. Our singer Andrew also has a studio at his place. He did all the vocals and recorded Noah's drum tracks at his place. And then we have a producer we've been working with. He worked on the last album as well, named Brad Cox. I met him through, we have a mutual friend and work acquaintance. Met him through Mike Klink, legendary producer, produced GNR, you know, Appetite for Destruction, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, and, you know, the list goes on and on and on from there. Met through him, and Brad's been a joy to work with. So we sent off all the tracks to Brad, and Brad mixed it at his studio. And it just seemed, we did kind of the same thing on the last album, and it seemed to really work out So this time we really expanded on that idea of seeing if we could push the boundaries of that, like what I could get away with at my studio and what we could get away with at Andrew's studio. Because this day and age, it's tough to not only to shell out a budget for 5 guys and a producer to spend a month and a half in a studio, let alone it's hard enough getting 5 guys in the same damn room. It's tough these days. Everyone's got crazy schedules. Me, Andrew, and Noah are in multiple bands. We're in another band together, so it's always splitting time. So we found out that this recipe really works for us. And I right now I couldn't be happier with it. All the masters are back. So we have everything for not only, the digital releases, but also for vinyl pressing. So we did a vinyl master. So we'll be releasing a vinyl as well, which,
Awesome.
Again, this day and age is, the 80s kid in me couldn't be happier, that vinyl has such a big resurgence the past, more than, 8 years now. So I'm an avid fan of that. And I think it's, and also from a band standpoint, being able to sell physical copies of something really helps the bands, especially on the road, man. Like if you have, if you went off of streaming, just streaming royalties alone, like no band would survive,
Yeah.
So it's good to have that kind of, I guess, your portfolio being diversified as much as possible, right?
Sure. Yeah, I've talked about this with a couple bands, but I feel like the power of a band like Metallica, for example. I mean, obviously their music is great, but they've just spent so many years circling the globe, shaking hands and playing shows in different cities. I feel like for any band, it's almost like that's what you got to do, but you can't sell records like you could back when they were in their peak. So it's kind of like you got to diversify, like you were saying. You got to figure out, vinyl, maybe merch, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of an ongoing battle. You got to kind of stay one step ahead of it, right?
Yeah, it used to be such a taboo for bands to lease their music to like a commercial or a video game or something like that. And now it's just like when I hear it, I'm like, good for them. It's like, how else do you make money anymore with
Yeah,
music?
exactly. So hey, AE Sports, if you're listening, we have tunes for you.
Yeah, they get you guys in the next Tony Hawk game or something.
Yeah. But it's you have to kind of definitely, it's, as a musician, you can't just rely on a label or even a business manager to kind of come up with these ideas. You have to kind of be willing to sit down and brainstorm yourself, and it's the only way to kind of keep one foot forward. So yeah, it's just that constant, like, okay, cool, let's see if we can, keep our ear to the ground, see, what kind of merch trends there are, or like, hey, do you guys want to do a limited cassette release or, stuff like that?
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to re-release your back catalog, that kind of thing,
Yeah, it's a cool time for artists because the technology to record and distribute is readily available and cheaper than ever. But it's also a challenge to really get out there. And like I see like what labels are looking for. And most labels, it's like by the time they'll sign a band doesn't need them. Like they've already got the audience and the platform to distribute their stuff. So it's like it's a wild west.
Yeah,
Almost.
I mean, it's crazy, and it's a lot of bands, I think, will view labels as, just unnecessary banks, so to speak, like,
Mhm.
and I could definitely see that from, a recent history standpoint, as far as, with the whole streaming boom and everything, like, why would a band want to kind of take on unnecessary debt, so to speak, for like advances or something like that? But I think also, just like any business, I think labels definitely have their place, just like banks would, or just like, a portfolio manager would.
Yeah.
I think they have their place and their purpose, and I think everyone's just trying to figure out how to kind of revamp their purpose and their place in the
Yeah.
industry. I mean, if you look what's going on with, the whole film industry now, it's crazy with the strikes and, the whole AI thing. And, so I think it's going to be some time before everybody gets this all figured out, and
Yeah.
how people get paid and how things work out. So it's a crazy time, but it's also I'm very hopeful that it leaves a lot of opportunity on the table as well. So
Totally. Hollywood's totally grappling with what the music industry grappled with when the iPod became a thing now.
yeah, it's like, hey, wait, didn't we see this before?
Yeah. And with your point about labels too, I've noticed this because we talked to a lot of labels and stuff, and I feel like there is a place for a label like Nuclear Blast, for example, or Cleopatra, who actually gives a shit about their artists
Yeah,
and really cares about this kind of music. Whereas, some of these bigger labels, it's just like a turn and burn, or like, okay, they don't care about their bands as much as some of these more indie labels. And when you have a group of people behind you that actually care about your music, it's
yeah,
valuable.
yeah. And honestly, I think that has to go with kind of the growth scale too, right? Like once you're a gigantic, huge pop star, the only thing that a label or someone like that is going to care about is growing that 2.2 into 2.4.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a lot more work and hands-on and attention needed to grow a band from, 3,500 monthly listeners to, 50,000 monthly listeners, so there's a lot more kind of hands-on approach to that. And I think that's
Mhm.
where these, these labels like Nuclear Blast, Cleopatra, Ripple, those labels really do kind of carry that weight and do care about their bands and their artists. And that is something that I don't think has changed and hopefully never will change for those kind of labels to exist and quite frankly give a shit, and because no matter what, I think there's always going to be those artists out there that might be absolutely world changing, but they just have zero clue how to
Mhm.
go about it. And they
Totally.
may, self-produce a demo in their bedroom, and it could be groundbreaking and awesome, but at the same time, they have zero idea how to grow it, right? And so you rely on the luck of, social media and grabbing people's attention, or you have somebody help you out. And I think that's a lot of where I think a label's purpose lies. But
Yeah.
like we just said, once you get to a certain point, eh. I mean, shit. Look back at the 70s. I mean, Zeppelin opened up their own label just for that reason. It's like, you know what? We're gonna take it over and do it ourselves.
Yeah.
The Beatles did the same damn thing.
Once you get big enough, you're like, okay.
Yeah,
Nowadays,
exactly.
it's like Kanye doing that and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, I guess the history does repeat itself.
Yeah,
So
the other thing about a label too, like when you think about it, it's like there's such a fire hose. I think it's a great time for music because of what we just said about the technology to record and distribute is so much better. But it's also as a result of that, there's like a fire hose of music. So a
yeah,
label can really help elevate you or get you out of that fire hose. And
yeah, exactly. Because I mean, it's a moving target, right? I mean, just and so yeah, at some point you have to like somehow get the target to slow down enough to aim at it. It's like I think the days of throwing shit at a wall and seeing what sticks are over. It's great that there is an ongoing just slew of new and exciting music out there, but also along with that slew of fantastic and exciting music, you as a listener will just get trampled into the ground with stuff that you have either no interest in or that's just quite frankly maybe just not that good.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. It's an open market, right? So it's kind of the beauty and the beast of it,
Totally.
So it's fantastic for especially young artists, a kid that wants to write a song, never did it before in their life. You know what I mean? Never released anything before their life. They have all of these, tools at their fingertips to do it. So, that right there, I think is pretty awesome and inspiring. Whereas if you look at the other side of the coin where, oh man, the industry's so watered down and we've been around for blah, 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 blah years. And it's tough for us to like keep our margins straight. And it's like, you got to figure out a new way, right? Rather than complain about it and bitch and moan, you just got to find a new way. You got to be smart, man. So you won't catch me going like, oh shit, boo-hoo, woe is us. Like, no, you got to put your nose to the grindstone, figure out a new way, make every opportunity count and be smart,
I remember when the landscape really started shifting and you had like Trent Reznor, for example, put out that album that you could bid for. Like you could download a free, like a kind of a shitty, like low quality rip for free, or you could pay and get like the FLAC version and all this stuff. And I was like, that is smart because people can just copy MP3s anyway, and there's no really containing it now. But now with streaming, I think it's a little better for artists than the Napster world was.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Cause you don't have, copies of a copy of someone's MP3 floating around that you want to listen to. And you pull it up and you just hear shit,
Right.
And it's somewhat controlled. Right. But what, even you too, like that one time, they just gave the album to everyone on iTunes, whether you wanted it or not. You got it.
Download. Damn you too.
Yeah, I remember. I think it took me like 3 months how to figure out how to get it out of my library.
Wait, what? How did this get on my iPod?
Yeah, it's freaking on random. It's like, why is this still coming up?
That was not a smart PR move on their part.
No, because I think it pissed off more people than it probably made happy.
Totally. Like, wait, you forced this shit into my library?
Yeah,
screw you. Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening with the movie industry now. Because like you were saying earlier, with the fire hose, and there's so much music. It's like I can't tell you how many people have been like, "Oh, have you seen this show or this show or that show?" And it's like there isn't enough time in the day for me to watch all the Netflix shows.
Yeah,
that people have recommended to me. So
yeah, it's a constant. I know my wife and I will literally. It'll be the first thing that we find that sounds interesting because we'll spend more time trying to find something to watch, meaning like narrowing it down than actually watching something. So now we just both go, screw it, put it on.
Yeah. Like going to dinner. Where do you want to eat? Like,
yeah, exactly. Spend more time talking about it than actually going. So it's crazy, man. It's information overload, right?
Yeah. Do you have a hard stop at 1:30?
No, man, we're good.
Okay, cool. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your rig and the stuff you play because I'm a bit of a guitar player myself, as you can probably see. So I'm curious, like, what kind of rig you play? What kind of guitars? Has it evolved at all?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, for years and years, I used to use an old school Mesa Triaxis and Simula Class 290 power amp, and that used to be the rig of doom because the thing weighed like 90 pounds, right? You know what I mean? This big ridiculous rack. And I think I ran TC. I'm trying to think, a G major, I think is what I ran as far as effects. And then it evolved. I started using Angle power balls for a while, which I still own and love. And then it just kind of always, I have a lot of guitar heads and it's tough for me to settle on one. But recently I've been using the Friedman a lot. That's the B Deluxe, the 50 watt Deluxe. I've been using that a lot the past couple years. I think it's just because it's super versatile. Like you can You can get some really brutal tones out of it, especially if you're like me and I like to stack gain stages.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on what you're putting in front of it, and you turn the SAT switch on and dial it in a little bit, you can get some really brutal tones out of it. And at the other side of the coin is it's got mids for days, so you're never going to get lost in a mix. You know what I mean? You're never going to get lost on stage. And the effects loop is really, really nice, and it's super transparent. That's one thing that I've learned, especially collecting gear, is like I might love the way an amp sounds, and then I'll go to use the effects loop, and I was like, oh, this thing's garbage. It just colors it so much. Like the 800, I absolutely love that amp. The effects loop, it's an early effects loop, so it's noisy and it's quirky, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and you just kind of pull the old Fonzie trick and smack on the amp to get it to come back on. But I've been using the Friedman a lot. I bought a Victory Kraken that I really, really dig as well. That is a pretty brutal amp. You plug into it and instantly it's like, oh, cool. It sounds like Ola England, and I really, really like it. Guitars. I'm a Les Paul guy.
Gibson.
Yeah, and for years I would drag out, an old 74 custom and an 86 custom on the road. And then one year I had a black 74 custom that got stolen while we were on the road. So then I got kind of smart and said, maybe I'll just leave the old ones at home and start touring with something that's a little easier to replace if it gets broken or gets lost, something like that. So recently I've been using the LTD full thickness Eclipses.
Okay.
Just because they're a little heavier. They have the full thickness. They have like that whole 60 slim profile neck. And they sound really good. They play really well. And the whole stainless steel fret thing kind of got me. I was like, oh man, no more getting refrets and stuff like that after beating a guitar into the dirt. Because I'm pretty tough on them. But I actually have a signature model in the works with Siggy Braun guitars out of Germany. That's going to be coming out, I think, in January for NAMM. So I think I'll be out at Anaheim at the booth showing everybody kind of what the guitar is about. It's definitely a Les Paul shape. That was like kind of my stipulation is like, okay, I like this kind of neck. It's got to be a single cutaway. It's got to be this kind of vibe to it. Because I like to marry like that vintage meets modern kind of thing. Not even just like how I like my guitars, but how I like my guitar sound. It's like very modern with, a pretty decent amount of gain and a nice amount of like low end. Like I like a lot of low end in my sound, but it's super mid driven and kind of get that old school vintage note bloom whenever you boost a solo kind of thing or bend a note. Cause at the end of the day, it's like, I love listening to players, like I said, like Jakey Lee and Slash and those guys that can make a note ring for days, like that whole Spinal Tap thing, like set the guitar down, walk away, have a cup of tea, come back. It's still, still going. Yeah. So like, I kind of take that approach where it's kind of a marriage of both, like that whole vintage meets modern thing. So it's a never ending quest, right?
Have you seen Kirk Hammett talk about that Greenie guitar that he had?
Yeah, I just watched the Rick Beato video.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that blew my mind when you were talking about the guitar getting stolen. I was like, oh my god, that guitar is like worth like $500,000 or $2 million or something like that.
Yeah, and he talks about like how he broke the headstock, and Gary Moore broke the headstock, and Peter Green. It's like, yeah, man, it's nuts.
I thought the coolest thing though was the phase thing. The guy wired it wrong, so when he switched to that middle thing, it gives you like phase distortion.
Yeah, and it's got this whole like almost Stratocaster vibe to it,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a complete gear nerd. I
Awesome.
mean, whether it's guitar gear, drum gear, bass, microphones, anything, man. Like, I'll sit down and talk about like old school, Rhodes pianos. Like, I just love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it.
I
There's this.
worked at I worked
Go
at
ahead.
Fender for just a minute in their
Oh, no
digital
way!
department. Yeah. And it was
Nice.
crazy because I'm probably not near as deep as you are on that front, but the guys who like made the amps, like the technicians there, are the coolest guys. Like fans of music. I worked in the digital part. It was a bunch of like yuppies and ties and stuff. But anyway, I have a new respect for Fender after that.
Yeah,
I've always been more of a Gibson person. I like that
that's
picker.
awesome. I mean, it's crazy nowadays too, because I mean, again, just like music, it's like there's so much gear out there. You can get lost. And like, even if you're experienced and you have a certain problem and you want a solution for it, whether it's just like, okay, I need a travel solution or whatever, and you just go on Sweetwater or whatever, and you start down this rabbit hole of like all of this gear and trying to narrow it down to like, okay, what will suit my needs, what will suit a budget price point. And obviously, like, then you go down the YouTube rabbit hole of like, okay, let me see if there's gear reviews. Let me, I could spend all of my time doing that. And my wife would probably attest to that too.
It's
She's
funny.
like,
I talked to the guitar player from Drowning Pool a couple months ago, and he's an electrician. The guy's like actually like a certified electrician, and he was
yeah,
telling me he loves to like mod his guitars and amps. And I was like, bro, you need to have a YouTube channel.
yeah,
I will watch that shit all day long.
yeah, absolutely, man. I would definitely watch that. Absolutely. Like, yeah, like you said, even like just even interviews and just like Rick Beato, for example. Like,
I
I
love
will
Rick
watch
Beato.
I will watch every single video that guy will post.
He's the best.
Whether it's like what makes a song great or if it's just his little shorts of breaking down a riff. I think it's awesome. He reignited my love for Boston and from a couple videos. I was like, my God, that band was insane.
His interview with Nuno Betancourt was
dude.
great.
Yeah.
Butch Vig. I've watched the Butch Vig one like 3 times now.
Yeah, man. Like,
so
and dude, kudos to Nuno, man. He's having a hell of a year, and rightfully so, because that dude is a beast.
He's a badass.
Yeah, dude is a beast.
So
man.
underrated.
Yeah, that new album, he absolutely knocked it out of the park. And I'm glad to see that, a lot of those guitar players that, especially on the tail end of the 80s, whenever, it became not so cool to be, really interested in your craft, so to speak.
Yep.
Or really kind of, the ones that are just really groundbreaking back then, they're getting another resurgence,
Totally. It's great. I clearly remember, because I used to buy Guitar World magazine and all the guitar magazines when I was a kid and get the tablature and stuff. I clearly remember the guys from Blind Melon like poking fun at, like making fun of Nuno Betancourt. And I don't even dislike Blind Melon. They have some good jams.
Exactly.
It was like, to your point, it's just like there got this point where it was like not cool to be a shredder anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, and obviously it's like a lot of that was probably self-inflicted, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
the backlash to prog. Punk was like a backlash to prog.
Yeah.
It just got too much,
Yeah, exactly. Like sometimes people don't want a 7-minute intro of a song before there's a lyric. You know what I mean?
As much as I love Dream Theater, there's a time and a place for it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, like, my early on in my rig, that was my insatiable, lust for John Petrucci's tone came from. It was like, oh man, he uses a tri-axis. I got to get a tri-axis. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, oh, he's using this and this and this. I got to try this. And still to this day, especially if I see, one of my favorite bands live or whatever, and actually see what they're using. And I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to get home and try that. There's still that little kid part of me that exists that like, oh man, I think I have one of those. I got to go try it. I got to go set it up this way.
I'm with it.
Yeah, I'm always, just on the eternal quest for the tone, you know.
You're a true gearhead.
I am, man, to a fault.
Well, so before we wrap up, what is your touring plans? Are you guys out this year, or are you not till next year? Or
we leave tomorrow for Europe.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so the rest of my afternoon is basically packing a bag, making sure that I have whatever pedals I'm going to take with me in my guitar case, which right now, you know, since we're on the gear subject, I think I'm taking, you know, the tried and true, you know, a tuner, a baby wah pedal, because I can't be trusted in another country without a wah pedal.
What wah do you use?
Normally I've been like on my pedal board, I've been using the Friedman No More Tears.
Okay.
But all over the last album, the wah I used was the Dunlop Slash.
Okay.
Wah, the old school one with the overdrive circuit in it.
Hammett was talking up that Dimebag wah and the Rick Beato.
Which, like, I would have never guessed he would have picked that wah. You know what I mean? I love the Jerry Cantrell one. Like that one's really good. But I take since you know it's fly dates, Dunlop came out with this little mini guy. It's about as wide as your phone, you know. And that's what I take on like to Europe or whatever, because I can literally just condense it, throw the pedals in the guitar case, and pull them out, and just set it on stage, and you're ready to go. You know.
So are you guys in Europe for the rest of the year?
No, man. It's a pretty short trip.
Okay.
I think we're there for like a week. So we got a festival. We land Thursday and we play. We land in Germany Thursday and we play a festival Thursday night in southern Germany in Bavaria. And then we'll be around that area the whole weekend, and then we do a festival in Aarberg, Switzerland, on Saturday, and we're gonna take a day and chill on Sunday, and then back.
Awesome.
So, yeah, so it's a short trip this time around. We like to do about 2.5 weeks is usually pretty good for Europe. Obviously, we'd all love to spend as much time as possible, but these days it's tough, you know. But yeah, and we got some other stuff on the horizon. We usually don't do that much touring in the wintertime. We used to tour all through January, February, and as you get older, I think it's just like it's tough to keep a band healthy in the wintertime too. And that was something that we battled with for years. It was like, man, January and February, especially once you get Midwest into, you know, the Rockies, it's like, oh my God, like this is pretty crazy. We're even going to make these dates, you know, that kind of thing. You know, playing in Toronto whenever it's like 14 below and it's like, this is crazy. So it's like, we try to be smart about it. So we usually try to keep like tour season between March and November ish, you know what I mean? And then that leaves us, because like I said, we're all in multiple bands. So it leaves wintertime for studio recording, whatever projects, getting all the kind of logistics as far as releases and stuff like that going on, you know? And that's the only way to really, you know, staying busy, and by doing multiple things anymore is really the only way to stay busy as a musician, I think, you know. Anyway, in the trad metal world, you know, I'm sure it'd be different if I was, you know, playing guitar for like Katy Perry or something, but but you know, hey, whatever. Like if it was, I view any gig is the same, no matter like what I'm playing or who I'm playing for. Like I've had to play a lot of different pop gigs. I've had to jump on stage and play guitar for people like Paul Stanley before. That was pretty crazy. and you just take it all in stride, and as long as you show up prepared and know what you're doing, man, the rest is going to take care of itself. Like, I think Phil X, he had this quote that I loved. He said, you know, you always have to bring your A game, because a B game's not going to get you back in the door, you know? So no matter what I do, whether it's teaching, recording, playing live or whatever, it's like A game. If you don't bring the A game, you know, I view it as like the show could be a success, but if I feel like I didn't bring my A game, like, man, I wish I could take that one back, you know? So it's just a good way to stay grounded, I think, you know, too, because it's like this day and age with that whole fire hose of, you know, music out there, I don't think you can afford to be a mediocre version of yourself. So I think you have to, I respect anyone that works their ass off being like the best versions of themselves. You know what I mean?
You gotta set yourself apart.
Yeah. Like whether like, and it's all about like, you know, just being true to whatever you do and doing it the best. It's always gonna shine that way, you know?
Do you see much of a difference in the crowds between Europe and the States?
Yeah.
Is it a lot bigger? Do you get a lot more people in Europe?
Yeah. And this is because we've been doing Europe for, I mean, between two separate bands, it's been going on for 10 years, man. Been doing Europe. And I can honestly say that not only is I think there's also a difference in the way that it's promoted and shows are promoted, but that's starting to change, because now, I mean, all you have to do is look at some of these festivals that are popping up all over North America. They're European style festivals, you know, where there's, you know, whether it be 1 day or 2 day or even 3 day festivals, but they'll have killer lineups, and they're slated out just like the European festival market always has been. And I think it's smart, because as it gets more difficult for bands to tour, you know, the festival circuit gives you an opportunity as a fan to see a ton of your favorite bands in one place, right? And I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of. I know I've seen it's doubled in the last 5 years, at least, if not tripled, maybe in the US. And some of these festivals are getting really goddamn big, and it's awesome. I couldn't be more stoked about it. But you know, there's something that about a European crowd that is just always, they're so energetic, they're so appreciative. And I think it's a lot of times that, especially for US bands, they're not able to see you all the time. You know, they're not able to just catch a random show. Hey, they're back here this month or whatever, you know, whereas even if a band is doing, you know, just touring the US once a year, you can always say like, oh, I'm going to wait till next year, you know, or touring regionally, like every couple months. I'll catch them in May when the weather's nicer, you know. There's not really that mindset there. It's like if they want to see you, they're going to come see you every time you're there, because you're not there often. And also it's usually a festival type scenario, so you know, you can see, you know, bands like us along with a, you know, band like Riot or you know, Metal Church or something like that, you know what I mean, where it's like you could see all these bands together, and it's a more of an event, you know. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well. But they're hungry for music, man. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be over there, to have music released over there. I mean, it's changed the band, definitely. I mean, because a lot of times it'd be like, man, like, especially whenever that weird phase of, okay, people weren't buying CDs anymore. Like we didn't have the focus on, oh, we got to make sure we get our, you know, like our numbers up. We have to make sure we get our, you know, whatever, checking numbers for Nelson reports and all this stuff. And it became this thing. It's like you've seen CD sales drop significantly, and then it was even before, before streaming was the thing, and Napster was the thing that drove that away. Whereas if you release something, tangible material over there is still very important.
Wow.
If a band releases something, they want it in hand. They want it, they want it on vinyl or CD, or they'll obviously listen to it online. But tangible product is still a very, very important thing over there. And I think it's super, super helpful to bands. Absolutely. Because it helps keeps us afloat, especially on the road. It's like those merch sales mean everything to bands that tour,
Yeah, streaming just ain't cutting it anymore. It's funny because I remember talking to Mike Borden from Faith No More in the late 90s during the Album of the Year tour, and he said, when we come over to the US, we play club shows, but in Europe we were filling stadiums, and that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's nuts, man. It's exactly that. It's like, okay, you're playing club shows or maybe small theaters, and then all of a sudden you go you play festivals in Europe, and you're playing in this gigantic field filled with tens of thousands of metalheads that know who you are, and they're singing along, and it's awesome,
Yeah.
So it's a little glimpse of hopefully that
What's to
festival
come.
mindset. Yeah, if that festival mindset keeps growing in the US, hopefully we'll see some of that,
To your point, man, I saw so many, like that Sick New World festival was out here in Vegas. They've got one called Power Trip coming up.
Yeah.
It's like, they're everywhere.
AC/DC and Maiden, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and there's, Hellfest, there's a bunch of great ones in the Midwest. They just started a new one in New England. We did called Stormbringer. We did the first year last year. I think this year was their second year, and it's already growing out the venue that they had it in. And this is going to be their third year next year. It's like, I think they're really going to have to expand it, which is awesome.
I definitely see with the younger generation too. I have a son who's a teenager, and they're like, all his friends listen to, grunge and like metal and band. So I definitely feel like there's a trend back towards like, real music, a little bit away from kind of like the computerized shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
I don't like some computerized shit too, but
yeah, I'm a but it's mostly 80s driven, like the new school, like dark wave synth stuff I listen to all the time, because it makes me feel like I'm playing like Rad Racer or something.
That, all the synth waves type stuff.
Yeah, I love it.
There's a lot of great like I listen to everything. I listen to a lot of hip hop. I listen to a lot of electronic, everything. But
same here. And I think the shift, because I teach as well, and a lot of the younger kids, and like early teenagers are really kind of making a shift to music that's more organic, I would say. It's less like, whether it be, like whether it's even so less overly produced, what I mean? It still sounds great, but it's not like everything's not completely lined up to a grid. Some bands are really going out of their way to make it sound more organic. And I think that's starting to catch on. And the simple fact that like kids are, still discovering Iron Maiden and thinking it's cool, or just, like, I think that's awesome. And
fantastic.
Yeah, like what I'm trying to do now is like those kids that are into that stuff. It's like, hey man, there's brand new bands out there doing this stuff too. That like, if you like this, you're really gonna dig this. So just kind of trying to do my part to like, keep that kind of music growing and stay alive and see how fast it will actually catch on and grow, because it is definitely growing. Now, it's definitely on the upswing, which is awesome. But
we just don't have like a headbangers ball like we used to have. That's where I would go to be like, okay, what's cool, what's new in metal. There's other kind of similar venues, but it's a little more fragmented, right? You can go to Spotify playlists, but even that, it's like, when I listen to the Spotify playlists that are like recommending me metal, I'm like, this is not the kind of metal I'm trying to listen to, Spotify.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, there's not a solidified place like waking up on a Saturday morning and going to the record store. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And whatever. If you've seen someone that was perusing the aisle, going through stacks of vinyl, if they had a Dio patch, like you knew that you were gonna gel with what they were into. You know what I mean? It's like, oh,
Yep.
I bet you they got some pretty cool albums at home.
Right.
So I think that it's a little harder to find, that sense of community, but I think they're doing it somehow. But again, it's like information overload, right? It's like, so many avenues and so many things coming at, a kid as far as a music consumer goes. It's like they almost don't have time to realize what they actually like or what they're into. It's like they got to go through, they really have to go through phases of discovery, and before they like it really latches onto them, and and I think again with like the whole vinyl resurgence thing, like seeing that artwork so big really helped me as a young person going like, I got to hear what this is,
Dio Holy Diver was my first metal album, and it was because of that cover, because I went, oh, that is so cool.
Yeah. And it was things like that. It's like, I don't know how many things I bought just because the cover.
The cover was cool. Yeah. I actually interviewed a band a couple weeks ago called Enforcer out of Sweden. I don't know if you've heard of
we know those guys very well.
Just because of that cover, the cover of their new record, it looks like something out of Stranger Things. I was like, that is fucking cool.
Yeah, we know those guys. Yeah, we know those guys very well. We actually brought them over. I think it was like 2007 or 8 or something, and had them play in Pittsburgh with us.
Awesome.
They were on tour, and we're like, hey man, we're going to book a date for Pittsburgh. Make sure you guys end the tour here or whatever. Super awesome guys.
I talked to Olaf.
Yeah, man, it's crazy, and they've been at it for a long time.
Long time. I was surprised. I was like, damn, you guys have been going. I had this joke. I was like, I swear to God, half of Sweden is like in rock bands, and then they just like tour the U.S. for half the year and spend the other half like relaxing in the fjords or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's funny because I mean, years ago, Jason and I like always set our goals like we're gonna play Sweden rock. That's what we want to do, and like all of our friends that are in Sweden, they just want to come to the US. It's like, hey man, let's just trade goals. Like you get us on Sweden rock and we'll line up US dates for you.
You do like exchange tours or something.
Yeah, exactly. All
right, one more thing I want to run by you because we got like 7 more minutes before we wind down. So we had this conversation, and I totally want to ask you this because you're a gear guy. But we're talking about classic albums, and someone in the comments actually was like, the reason that there aren't as many classic albums post 2000 is because of that switch to the grid. Like everyone does production on that grid now in Pro Tools. What do you think about that? Do you think there's any truth to that?
I could see a bit of truth to it. Just because, whenever you lock everything to a grid, it seems so stagnant, right? But on the other side of things, like any Typo Negative fan should know this fact, but if you don't, I'm about to crush your hopes and dreams. A lot of the classic Typo Negative stuff was a drum machine, which is crazy because as a drummer, and I heard, songs like, Christian Woman, I was just like, oh man, or like Black Number One is like, how do I get that drum sound? Like, how do I get that? Well, you don't. It's a goddamn drum machine. Like, I didn't know that, but I thought it sounded amazing. And the same thing with like those classic drummers. A lot of them might as well have been on the grid because they were so goddamn good. Like,
like Bonham is just like rock solid.
Bonham and like Jeff Porcaro. Like,
oh man,
like that dude,
shuffle.
Yeah, like that dude he was a walking metronome,
Well, so I got into an argument with someone about this a couple months ago because this guy was like, I was like, no, you got to record to a grid. And he's like, no, you don't. Like none of the old artists did. And then Rick Beato's interview with Billy Corgan is what changed my mind, because they were talking about Jimmy Chamberlain and the way that he plays. He kind of like pushes and pulls against the pocket. And I was like, he's like, you couldn't record that to a drum machine. I'm like, okay, yeah, you changed my mind.
Yeah, and I think so that does make, things sound more stagnant. But obviously, like a great drummer, even if they're playing to a click, they will still give that push and pull.
Yeah.
Right. They'll make it.
Good point.
They'll make it human.
Dave Grohl can do that.
Yeah, like I think it's whenever things are sliced up so far and literally just like slam to the grid, that's where it loses organic territory. That, and honestly, like there's so many things that could go into this conversation. I think just how technology has the ebb and flow of technology infiltrating the recording process, right? Whereas like in the early days of whenever Pro Tools became the standard. So now you're replacing all this great analog gear that the industry has used forever to use a digital representation of that. The ease of it was fantastic. What was not fantastic is everyone dialing in the same algorithm as everyone else for their compressors or their preamps. Then all of a sudden, all the vocal tracks started to sound the same.
Yeah.
In the
or everyone's using auto-tune.
Yeah. And, so like in the 2000s, a lot of productions were just the same. It's like, oh my God, a lot of those in the late 2000s, especially, like, it's like, man, that drum sounds the same. That guitar sounds the same. That
the same EQ settings on the snare and kick.
Yeah. So now, with technology getting better, it's kind of funny that, you have plugins that are even more organic to sound like the old thing that they replaced. But, but now a lot of studios and even like self studios, me included, I try to run analog gear as much as possible. I only use Pro Tools or a DAW as basically a hard drive. I use it as a tape machine, so to speak.
That's awesome.
So that's where everything's getting stored. And or like, okay, if you do have to edit, that's kind of like cutting tape, you know what I mean? But I'm not creating the sounds in Pro Tools. The sounds are getting created outside with like, these EQs and these preamps and stuff like that. And I think that's where you can make your music more organic and more expressive, is just not always trusting what you see on the computer screen, but literally like forcing yourself to make decisions outside of that.
Yeah. You need a combination of the digital technology with the analog outboard stuff.
Yeah. And I think I did this recording summit last year, and this producer was talking about you just have to make decisions, and the best way to make a decision sometime is to literally, that's what you're left with. That's what the sound is you recorded with, and now you need to make a decision with it and force that, and that's what will make your art or your recording different.
Yeah.
That's what's going to make it sound different. That's maybe what's going to make it great, but you've had to make that decision. And forcing yourself to make those decisions, you'll start making better decisions.
Totally.
And that like kind of struck a nerve with me. I was like, oh God, okay, yeah, like maybe I am relying on that too much, But yeah, so I think it's interesting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, listen, man, let's wrap everything up. Please come back through again when you guys. The album comes out October what?
27th.
October 27th. Come back through again when the album comes out, or when you guys are doing a tour or whatever. Come back and talk to me again.
Man. Absolutely. Thank you, man. I appreciate everything.
Absolutely, really appreciate your time, and hopefully to see you guys out here on the West Coast too.
Yeah, we were just there in April. So I know we'll be back out there. My other band will actually be in Anaheim in October.
What's your other band called?
Iron Flame.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be we're playing the Grove
I'll check you guys
Amphitheater
out.
in October. But Icarus Witch, we plan on doing another West Coast run definitely next year. So
Awesome.
I will definitely keep you informed, and I'd love to be back, man.
Yeah, please come back through.
All right, man.
Again,
Thank you so much.
Talk more shop. Appreciate your time, man. Take care of yourself.
Thanks, man.
Have a good one.
You too.
All right. Well, that was Quinn from Icarus Witch, and we went. That was an hour-long conversation, so that actually went really well. Check out. They have a new single out called "Rise of the Witch." Check that out. They got a new album coming out October 27th. And if you're in Europe, you'll be able to catch them on tour here in the near future. I think Germany is where he was saying they were headed. So if you tuned in, thank you for doing so. Tomorrow, we're going to be live with Johnny Kelly from Typo Negative, from Kill Devil Hill, from Quiet Riot, from I Am, from Silvertone. This guy's in 8,000 bands. So we'll talk to him tomorrow. And then Thursday, we got Maddox Messer from the band Messer. And then next week, we have Scott from Zayo coming in. And I have another guest I'm just waiting to confirm, but it's a pretty big band that I absolutely love. So I'm just like chomping at the bit to announce that or post the graph, post the thumbnail, But anyway, take care of yourselves out there. Thank you for tuning in if you did. And we'll see you next time. Oh, wait a minute.